The harsh red sun of Proxima Centauri beat down on the barren training grounds of Camp Horizon. Sweat poured down Private Jack Henderson's face as he struggled to keep pace with the rest of his squad. His lungs burned and his muscles screamed for relief, but he pushed on. This was just another day of Hell Week for the 57th Terran Expeditionary Force. "Move it," Maggot's Sergeant Major Vaxthar bellowed, his forearms gesticulating wildly. The Arcturian drill instructor's leathery gray skin glistened with exertion, but his pace never faltered. "You think the swarm's going to wait for you to catch your breath?" Jack glanced at his squad mates. To his left, Private Jen Lu from the Mars colony gritted her teeth, determination etched on her face. On his right, Private Koai Amalu from New Hawaii seemed to glide effortlessly across the rocky terrain, his muscular frame built for endurance. Behind them, Private Nikolai Volkov from the Ganymede outpost cursed in Russian, his stocky form struggling with the planet's higher gravity. At the front of the pack, two figures stood out. Private First Class Diego Reyes, a wiry youth from the slums of Neo Sao Paulo, led the group with an easy lope. Beside him lumbered Grok, the squad's other alien member. The Betelgeusian's massive, 500-pound frame belied his surprising agility. As they crested a hill, the squad's final member came into view. Private Samantha Chen from the Titan colony was already at the obstacle course, her slight frame and zero-G upbringing giving her an advantage in Proxima's lower gravity. Last one to finish buys the drinks Diego called out with a grin, accelerating towards the towering walls and razor wire. Jack summoned his last reserves of energy and sprinted after his squadmate. He'd be damned if he'd let the cocky Brazilian show him up again. As he threw himself into the mud beneath the first obstacle, Jack couldn't help but wonder how this ragtag group of misfits was supposed to become humanity's first line of defense against the swarm. The alien horde had appeared at the edge of the solar system 6 months ago, devouring everything in their path. Now, with Earth's colonies under siege, the Terran Alliance had been forced to cobble together a fighting force from whatever volunteers they could muster. Jack had signed up on a whim, seeking adventure and an escape from his mundane life as a hydroponics tech on Lunar Base Alpha. Now, as he crawled through muck and barbed wire, he was beginning to regret that decision. A hand reached down, hauling him to his feet. Jack looked up to see Koa's broad smile. "Come on, brah," the Hawaiian said. "Can't let the lizard man drink all our beer." "Yeah." Despite his exhaustion, Jack found himself grinning back. Maybe there was hope for this squad after all. 3 months later, the 57th TF found themselves on the front lines. The swarm had breached the outer defenses of Alpha Centauri, and every available unit was being thrown into the meat grinder. Jack crouched in his powered armor, the suit's servos whining as he shifted position. The drop pod shuddered around him as it plummeted through the atmosphere of Chiron, the system's sole habitable world. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out the chatter of his squadmates over the comm. 30 seconds to impact, the AI announced coolly. "Prepare for combat drop." Jack's grip tightened on his pulse rifle. This was it. All those weeks of training were about to be put to the test. "Listen up," Maggot's Sergeant Vaxthar's gravelly voice cut through the noise. "I know you're scared. I know you think you're not ready. But let me tell you something, the swarm doesn't care. They're down there right now, tearing apart everything we've built. Our job is to kick their chitinous asses back to whatever hellhole they crawled out of. Are you with me?" A chorus of affirmatives rang out, some more confident than others. "Remember your training," the sergeant continued. "Stick together, watch each other's backs, and for the love of all that's holy, don't try to be a hero. We're a team, and we'll win or die as one. Understood?" "Sir, yes sir," the squad responded in unison. The pod's hull glowed red-hot as they entered the lower atmosphere. Through the viewports, Jack could see the devastation below. The colony's capital city was in flames, its towering skyscrapers reduced to twisted metal and shattered glass. In the distance, massive swarm bioships loomed over the landscape, disgorging waves of smaller creatures. "Brace for impact," Vaxthar shouted. The world exploded around them as the pod slammed into the ground. Shock absorbers strained to their limits, and for a moment Jack thought they'd been pulverized on landing. Then the hatch blew open, and acrid smoke poured in. "Go, go, go," the sergeant bellowed. Jack stumbled out of the pod, his armor's systems quickly adjusting to the planet's gravity. All around him, the rest of the squad emerged, weapons at the ready. They had landed in what used to be a public park. Now it was a hellscape of burning trees and cratered earth. In the distance, the chittering screech of the swarm grew louder. "Form up," Vaxthar ordered. "Defensive perimeter, now." The squad moved with practiced precision, each member taking their assigned position. Jack found himself between Jen and Nikolai, their armored forms providing a small measure of comfort. "Contact, 3:00, Diego's voice crackled over the comm. "Swarm scouts, closing fast." Jack swiveled, his helmet's HUD highlighting the approaching threats. A wave of chitinous horrors scuttled towards them, all razor-sharp claws and gnashing mandibles. "Weapons free," the sergeant roared. "Light 'em up." The air filled with the staccato rhythm of pulse rifles and the whoosh of plasma bolts. Jack's first shot went wide, but his second caught a swarm drone square in its compound eyes. The creature exploded in a spray of ichor and chitine. Beside him, Jen's sniper rifle cracked repeatedly, each shot dropping a target. On his other side, Nikolai hefted a massive flamethrower, engulfing a cluster of enemies in liquid fire. For a moment, Jack allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. They were holding their own, working together like a well-oiled machine. Then he heard Samantha's scream. "They're in the trees," she shrieked. "Oh God, they're..." Her voice cut off abruptly. Jack spun around just in time to see a massive, spider-like creature dragging her thrashing form into the canopy. "Sam," he shouted, breaking formation and sprinting towards her. "Henderson, get back in line," Vaxthar bellowed, but Jack ignored him. He reached the base of the tree and began to climb, his armor's servos straining with the effort. Above him, he could hear Samantha's muffled cries and the aliens chittering. A claw swung out of the darkness, catching Jack across the faceplate. His HUD flickered, and he nearly lost his grip. But he pressed on, hauling himself onto a thick branch. There, in a twisted nest of webbing, he saw Samantha. The spider thing loomed over her, its mandibles dripping with venom. Without thinking, Jack charged. He slammed into the creature with all his armor's enhanced strength, sending them both tumbling from the tree. They hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind from Jack's lungs. The spider thing recovered first, its legs scrabbling for purchase as it lunged at Jack. He brought up his rifle, squeezing the trigger and holding it down. Pulse after pulse tore into the creature's carapace, blowing chunks of flesh and ichor in all directions. Finally, mercifully, it stopped moving. Jack lay there for a moment, gasping for breath. Then a hand appeared in his vision. He looked up to see Grok, the Betelgeusian's craggy face split in a toothy grin. "Not bad," human Grok rumbled, hauling Jack to his feet. "But next time, leave the climbing to those of us with more than 2 limbs. Yes." Before Jack could respond, Sergeant Vaxthar's voice cut in. "If you two are done sightseeing, we could use some help over here." Jack turned to see the rest of the squad besieged by a fresh wave of swarm drones. Without hesitation, he and Grok charged back into the fray. As he fought alongside his teammates, Jack felt something change within him. This wasn't just a collection of misfits anymore. This was his family, and he'd die before he let them down. Days bled into weeks as the 57th fought their way across Chiron. The swarm seemed endless, each victory Pyrrhic as more colonists fell to the relentless alien tide. But slowly, surely, humanity began to push back. Jack crouched behind the shattered remains of a colonial admin building, his armor caked with mud and alien gore. Beside him, Koei worked frantically to patch a breach in Nikolai's suit. The Russians labored breathing, filling their comms. "How's he looking?" Jack asked, risking a glance over their cover. In the distance, he could see the massive form of a swarm hive ship, its organic bulk dominating the skyline. Koei shook his head. "Not good, brah. That last hit ruptured his O2 recycler. He's breathing straight atmosphere now." Jack swore under his breath. Chiron's air wasn't toxic, but it was thin, barely enough oxygen to keep a baseline human conscious, let alone fighting fit. "All right, new plan," he said, switching to the squad channel. "Listen up, people. Nikolai's down for the count. We need to fall back to the evac point." Negative on that. Henderson Sergeant Vaxthar's voice crackled through the static. Command just sent new orders. We're to hold this position at all costs. With all due respect, Sergeant cut in, her usual calm demeanor fraying at the edges. We can't hold anything if we're dead. We need to regroup. There was a long pause, filled only by the distant sounds of battle and Nikolai's ragged breathing. Finally, the sergeant spoke again. Agreed. But we can't leave empty-handed. That hive ship's been coordinating the swarm's movements across half the continent. If we can take it out, we might just turn the tide of this whole damn war. Jack's mind raced. It was suicide, plain and simple. But if they pulled it off? I've got an idea, he said slowly. But you're not going to like it. 10 minutes later, Jack found himself stuffed into a swarm drone's carapace. The hollowed-out creature's legs wrapped around him like a macabre exoskeleton. Beside him, Diego and Samantha were similarly attired, looking like extras from a low-budget horror vid. I can't believe this is actually working, Samantha muttered as they shuffled towards the hive ship's entrance. All around them, live drones scuttled past, paying no attention to their disguised interlopers. Just keep moving, Diego hissed. And whatever you do, don't scratch. These things itch like you wouldn't believe. As they approached the organic airlock, Jack felt his heart rate spike. This was at the point of no return. Either they'd pull off the impossible, or they'd die trying. The membrane parted with a sickening squelch, allowing them entry. Inside, the ship was a nightmare of pulsing flesh and writhing tentacles. Bioluminescent patches cast an eerie glow over everything, making the shadows seem to move of their own accord. According to the intel Jack whispered, the ship's neural cluster should be near the center. If we can plant our charges there, the whole thing should go up like a Roman candle. They moved deeper into the ship, every step a test of their nerve and their disguises. Twice they passed by larger swarm creatures' drones that seemed to be of a higher caste. Each time, Jack was sure they'd be discovered. But somehow, miraculously, they pressed on. Finally, they reached the central chamber. Here, the ship's walls pulsed with a sickly light, veins of energy coursing through the living metal. And there, suspended in a cradle of tendrils, was their target, a mass of neural tissue the size of a small car. Oh, that's disgusting, Samantha gagged, her voice barely audible. Focus, Jack said, shrugging off his carapace disguise. Diego, start planting the charges. Sam, watch our six. I'll see if I can access their network, maybe grab some intel before we blow this popsicle stand. He approached one of the pulsing veins, activating his suit's interface. To his surprise, he found he could connect to the ship's systems with relative ease. It was as if the swarm had never considered the possibility of infiltration. As data began to flow into his HUD, Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just battle plans or troop movements. This was the swarm's entire history, their origins, their motivations, their ultimate goal. Guys, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, you need to see this. But before he could elaborate, alarms began to blare throughout the ship. The walls themselves seemed to shudder and contract around them. We've been made, Diego shouted, scrambling to finish setting the last charge. We need to go now. Jack disconnected from the network, his mind reeling from what he'd discovered. But there was no time to process it now. They had to move. The trio sprinted back the way they'd come, all pretense of stealth abandoned. Behind them, they could hear the enraged shrieks of the swarm echoing through the ship's corridors. They burst out of the airlock and into chaos. The rest of the squad had engaged the swarm in a desperate holding action, buying time for the infiltration team. The air was thick with pulse fire and alien ichor. Fall back, Jack roared, triggering the detonator as they ran. It's gonna blow. The ground shook as explosions ripped through the hive ship. Great gouts of flame erupted from its organic hull, and a psychic scream tore through their minds. All around them, swarm drones began to fall, their coordinated attacks degenerating into mindless flailing. As the 57th TF regrouped at their fallback position, Jack allowed himself a moment of relief. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd struck a crippling blow against the enemy. But as he looked at his battered and bloodied squadmates, he knew this was just the beginning. The swarm might be reeling, but they were far from defeated. and what he'd learned in those final moments aboard the Hive ship. It changed everything. The war for humanity's survival was entering a new phase, and the 57th would be on the front lines. But as Jack met the eyes of his teammates, his brothers and sisters in arms, he knew they'd face whatever came next together. The debriefing room on the TIA's Indomitable hummed with tension. Jack sat at the conference table, surrounded by his squad mates and a collection of high-ranking officers. Admiral Elena Vasquez, commander of the Terran Alliance's Third Fleet, studied the holographic display of Chiron with a furrowed brow. "Let me get this straight, Private Henderson," she said, her voice sharp. "You're telling me that the swarm isn't just some mindless horde of space locusts, but an engineered bioweapon created by an ancient alien civilization?" Jack nodded, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Yes, ma, I am. According to the data I accessed, the swarm was designed as a sort of galactic reset button. When a civilization reaches a certain level of technological advancement, it triggers the swarm's activation. They consume everything in their path, reducing advanced worlds back to primordial soup." A heavy silence fell over the room. It was Sergeant Vaxthar who finally broke it, his gravelly voice tinged with disbelief. "But why? What kind of sick bastards would create something like that?" Jack took a deep breath. The records weren't clear, but it seemed to be some kind of misguided attempt at galactic conservation. The creators believed that unchecked technological growth would eventually lead to the heat death of the universe. The swarm was meant to be a fail-safe, where culling advanced civilizations to preserve something. The data was corrupted at that point. Admiral Vasquez leaned back in her chair, her face a mask of grim determination. "This changes everything. If what you're saying is true, Private, we're not just fighting for our survival. We're fighting for the right of every sentient species to exist and evolve." She stood, addressing the entire room. "I'm classifying this information at the highest level. For now, we continue the fight as before. But I want every scrap of swarm tech analyzed. If they have a kill switch, we need to find it." As the meeting adjourned, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Diego, the Brazilian's usual cocky grin replaced by a look of quiet respect. "Nice work in there," Amigo Diego said softly. "You might have just saved the whole damn galaxy." Jack managed a weak smile. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have a war to win." Little did they know, the war was about to come to them. Alarms blared throughout the Indomitable, jolting Jack from a fitful sleep. He was on his feet and halfway into his armor before the ship-wide announcement even began. "All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, all hands to battle stations." The corridors were chaos as crew members rushed to their posts. Jack sprinted towards the hangar bay, his mind racing. They were supposed to be safe here, deep in Alliance territory. How had the swarm found them? He burst into the hangar to find the rest of the 57th already assembled. Sergeant Vaxthar's expression was grim as he briefed the squad. "Listen up, people. We've got a swarm fleet incoming, at least 3 Hive ships, and a swarm of smaller bioforms. They've already taken out our long-range comms. We're on our own out here." Nikolai, still pale from his recent injury, spoke up. "But how did they find us? We're light years from the front." The sergeant's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of agitation. "Unknown. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we're the only thing standing between those bugs and the Arcturus colony. 50 million civilians are counting on us to hold the line." Jack felt his throat tighten. Arcturus was one of humanity's oldest and most populous colonies. If it fell. "What's the plan?" Sarge Koa asked, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by steely resolve. Vaxthar activated a holographic display, showing the Indomitable and the approaching swarm fleet. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. Our intel suggests that Hive ships are vulnerable during their reproductive cycle. One of the incoming ships is in the middle of spawning a new hive. If we can take it out, we might just throw their whole attack into disarray." He looked each of them in the eye. "I won't lie to you. This is a suicide mission. But if we pull it off, we buy time for reinforcements to arrive. Any volunteers?" Without hesitation, every member of the 57th stepped forward. The next few minutes were a blur of preparations. As Jack checked his gear one last time, he felt a presence beside him. It was Jayan, the quiet sniper from Mars. "Jack," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, it's been an honor serving with you. With all of you." Jack nodded, unable to find the words. Instead, he clasped her arm in a warrior's grip. Around him, similar scenes played out as the squad said their goodbyes without really saying goodbye. Then they were in their drop pods, plummeting through space towards the massive hive ship. Anti-aircraft fire from smaller swarm craft lit up the void around them, and Jack's pod shuddered as a near miss scorched its hull. "Remember the plan?" Vaxthar's voice crackled over the comm. "We hit them hard and fast. Plant the antimatter charges and get out. May whatever gods you believe in watch over you." Jack's pod slammed into the hive ship's outer hull, drills engaging to burrow through the living metal. As the hatch blew open, he was immediately assaulted by the ship's alien atmosphere, a thick, cloying miasma that seemed to writhe with malevolent purpose. He pushed forward, pulse rifle at the ready. Around him, the rest of the squad emerged from their own entry points. They converged on a central corridor, moving with the fluid precision born of months of combat and shared hardship. The ship's interior was a nightmare of pulsing flesh and bioluminescent horror. Swarm drones swarmed towards them, mandibles clicking and claws slashing. The 57th met them with a wall of firepower, cutting through the alien tide with grim efficiency. But for every drone they killed, 2 more took its place. They were being pushed back, slowly but surely away from their objective. "We're not going to make it," Samantha yelled, her voice tight with fear and determination. That's when Grok stepped forward. The massive Betelgeusian hefted his heavy plasma cannon, a weapon almost as big as Jack himself. "You will make it," Grok rumbled. "I will ensure it." Before anyone could stop him, Grok charged into the thickest concentration of swarm drones. His massive bulk and armor shrugged off attacks that would have shredded a human, and his cannon carved a path of destruction through the alien horde. "Go," he roared. "Complete the mission." Jack wanted to argue, to find some way to save their alien comrade. But he knew Grok was right. This was bigger than any of them. "You heard him," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's make it count." They pressed on, Grok's last stand buying them the time they needed to reach the ship's reproductive chamber. The sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and horrifying, a massive, pulsing organ the size of a small moon, writhing with nascent hive life. "Plant the charges," Vaxthar ordered. "We've got incoming." As the squad worked to set the antimatter devices, a new threat emerged. From the depths of the chamber rose a creature unlike anything they'd seen before, a swarm queen, her bloated form swollen with eggs and radiating malevolent intelligence. "Oh shit," Diego breathed. That's not good." The queen let out a psychic shriek that brought Jack to his knees, his mind reeling from the alien assault. Through watering eyes, he saw Nikolai go down, blood trickling from his ears. "Fall back," Vaxthar shouted. "The charges are set. We need to go now." But retreat was impossible. The Queen's guards, massive Praetorians with scythe-like limbs, cut off their escape route. They were trapped. Jack looked at his squadmates, his family. He saw the same realization in their eyes. This was it. This was where they made their last stand. "Together," he said, raising his rifle. Together they echoed. As one, the 57th charged towards the Queen, determined to take her down with them. The air filled with pulse fire and alien ichor as they fought with everything they had. Jack saw Jeanne go down, a Praetorian's claw punching through her armor. Diego fell next, his final act to shove Samantha clear of a deadly strike. One by one, his brothers and sisters in arms fell. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, Jack's HUD lit up with an incoming transmission. A familiar voice crackled through the static. "This is Admiral Vasquez of the TA's Normandy. 57th, if you can hear me, hold on. The cavalry's here." The chamber shook as Alliance weaponry tore into the hive ship from the outside. The Queen shrieked in rage and pain, her concentration broken. Now Vaxthar roared. "Hit the detonator." With the last of his strength, Jack activated the antimatter charges. The world went white, and he knew no more. Jack awoke to the sterile white of a medical bay. For a moment he was sure he was dead. Then the pain hit, and he knew he was very much alive. "Easy there, soldier," a familiar voice said. "You've been through hell." He turned his head to see Admiral Vasquez sitting beside his bed. Her uniform was scorched and torn, and a fresh scar ran down one side of her face. "The others," Jack croaked, his throat dry. Vasquez's expression softened. "You were the only one we pulled out alive." "I'm sorry, Jack. They died heroes." The words hit him like a physical blow. Grok, Jen, Diego, Nikolai, Koa, Samantha. Even the hard-ass Sergeant Vaxthar. Gone, all gone. But their sacrifice wasn't in vain, Vasquez continued. The destruction of that hive ship created a chain reaction. The entire swarm fleet was wiped out. Arcturus is safe, and we've pushed the enemy back across 3 sectors. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "More than that. The data you recovered has given us a fighting chance. We've located the swarm's point of origin, the homeworld of the species that created them. A joint task force is being assembled as we speak. We're taking the fight to them, Jack, and we want you to lead the charge." Jack closed his eyes, feeling the weight of all they'd lost and all that was still at stake. When he opened them again, there was a fire there that hadn't been present before. "When do we start?" he asked. As Vasquez began to outline the upcoming mission, Jack's thoughts turned to his fallen comrades. They had started as misfits, thrown together by chance and desperation. They had become family, forged in the crucible of war. And now they were legends. He would carry their memory with him, into whatever battles lay ahead. For his brothers and sisters in arms. For humanity. For the very future of the galaxy itself. The war was far from over. But thanks to the sacrifice of the 57th, there was hope. And sometimes hope was enough.